Hey, my name is Jordan, and in this video we're going to be talking about how I set up my drives. When I set up my drives, I think there's one thing that I learned kind of later on in what my playing was. A lot of times growing up, you know, we've all kind of had the like metal zone, boss pedals and things like that, so we really kind of over exaggerate our distortion. We think that when we play our guitars as distorted as possibly can be, it sounds the best, it sounds the biggest, and it's going to stick out the most in the mix. I found that to be actually not true. What ends up happening is if you look at a sine wave and you put a distortion pedal on it, what you're creating is you're creating overtones on your guitar. You're creating overtones on whatever your signal is. What this does is this ends up compressing your sound and having it sit further back on in the mix. So when I play, I try to think about that. I try to think, I don't want to overdo this. I don't want to have too much distortion, because if I do, you're not really going to be able to hear me. Now, for me, I play in a couple different scenarios. I play in small worship teams where we'll have 4 or 5 people on the stage. And I also play in a situation where I have a full choir and an orchestra. So sitting out in the mix, especially in those situations, can be very, very difficult. So I have to lean a little bit more to the clean side of my sound. So I'm going to show you what I do for my distortion in my stage, in my gain stages, and then we'll talk about how I set it up. So first, I have my clean sound. I'm going to cut my reverb off here and delay. I'll keep my reverb on. But anyway, so my clean sound sounds like this. So that's very clean, very crisp. There's not a whole lot of breakup at all. I typically lean to this. I like having a really clean setting on my amp, and then I move from there. Sometimes, especially if you're using like a tube amp or something like that, you can actually get your distortion from just cranking your amp. Sounds great, awesome. So I still work with that. I use a Kemper, but it works the same way. If I push the volume in on the front end of it, I get more distorted sounds. That's my stage 1, like clean sound. And then I'll go to the next thing, which I typically turn on my Morning Glory. So again, that's not a whole lot of breakup. Again, the difference is this. You can see that it's getting a little bit more saturated and a little bit more compressed. Now that's typically my stage 1. I also might use the Super Bolt. And this is a little bit more gritty kind of sound. So either one of those will be my stage 1. Now, here's a different concept. What I do is I don't try to have one pedal that creates all the overdrive and distortion. Instead, I stack my drives. A lot of people make fun of me because I really like drives, and so I actually have quite a few stage sections on my board where I can get lots of different variations of my overdrive sound. So one thing that I typically do is I love the JHS Morning Glory. This is kind of like a blues breaker circuit. So if you have like a Boss blues breaker, you can find one of those really, really cheap. You can find it on Reverb or anywhere else. It's very similar to that. I love this one though. It's a little bit more pricey, but I love the way that it ends up sounding overall. So I typically turn that on, and then I will push that sound. I push the Morning Glory and then also my amp to get higher stages of gain. So this is what I have at first. It'd be and then I'll add the second. It'd be Now, for the most part, that's about as much as I want to get out of my overdrives. Now, I have a couple different things that I can do. If I want to get different sounds, I also have on this side of the JHS Sweet Tea, this also is a tube screamer. You can get that, again, anywhere you want, Reverb or eBay or anything like that. Super classic green pedal. This kind of gives me a little bit of more of a nasal sound when listening to it, and that helps me poke through the mix. I don't particularly like a tube screamer by itself. I know that's maybe controversial, but I enjoy listening to it pushing something else. So that sounds pretty bright, and it's able to cut through a mix, especially if I'm with a big team, or if I'm even when I'm with a band. You know, a lot of times the space that we're trying to fill is very similar to that of like a keyboardist or a piano player, and so my sound has to be a little bit different because a lot of times the notes that we're playing are the same. So that's kind of where I go on that. Now, one other thing that I really like to do is I love boost pedals. Now, you can get boost pedals pretty much anywhere. There's the JHS Mini Bomb Boost. I'm going to step out of frame. Here we go. So this is one of my favorite pedals. It is super clean. I love it. Now, I have it gaff taped because it was a specific way. I actually ran this post amp, and I would use this for like anytime I had a guitar solo, pop me up in the mix and be able to do that. And but you can also use it before your amp and push your amp a little bit more. So this is not like a distortion. You're just pushing your amp a little bit more. Now, right now, I have the Jackson Audio Prism, and this thing is like the best. People say it's like Photoshop for your guitar. I totally agree. So on this, I can keep it pretty super clean. I think that's almost a sterile sound in a lot of ways. But if I turn this on, I can actually crank the boost and volume at the front, and you'll notice that I get a lot more overdrive. Now, again, obviously my volume is actually increasing because I'm pushing the volume at the front end. But if I do something like that and I push something that I already have, like for example the Morning Glory, I again really build up my sound. So. So you can use a boost pedal to actually change the character and the sound of a pedal that you already have. Now, the last thing that I do, I've literally talked about this whole video, not doing too much as far as your sound goes and keeping your drive to a minimum. There is one exception. I think sometimes having a really great solo tone or a lead tone is really, really important. And sometimes I just need a little bit more of a boost, a little bit more of a kick, so that when I go into a solo, I'm really, really saturated and it sounds huge. Now, again, there's some things that we have to compensate for here. I said at the beginning of the video that when we overdrive our signal, no matter what kind of clipping you're using, whether it's hard clipping or soft clipping, whatever you end up doing, you end up sitting further back in the mix. You're not going to stick out as much. So as I get to higher gain settings, I need to do two things. I need to make my sound a little bit brighter. You'll see that on a lot of these things, they have tone knobs. And when we're playing by ourselves, our tendency is to roll that tone knob back so that way it's not harsh on our ears. Especially when we're playing with a band, especially when we're going to higher gain stages, we need to start allowing more presence and more tone knob to come through so that way then we can stick out. The second thing is that you probably need a boost pedal after your amp or at some point so you can push your amp to be a little bit louder. Now I'm using the Kemper, and so what I can do is I actually have, after all of the amp settings, I have a boost pedal. This means I'm not creating any more drive on the amp. If you have an amp that allows you to have an effects loop or something like that, that's how I would use it. The effects loop allows you to go after the amp, no distortion is added to the amp whatsoever, but you get louder. It's a totally true clean boost. Any boost prior to the amp will overdrive the amp a little bit more. So I have that set up. No need to demonstrate that here except for that I just get louder. It's my louder button. Sometimes you just need to be a little louder and a little bit brighter. So again, this is what we end up doing. we end up saying like, hey, we're playing and I need a little bit more of an overdrive tone for a solo. I kick in this sound. This is a little bit more of a hard clipping sound. Everything else I've demonstrated is mostly soft clipping or transparent overdrives, to be kind of cliche on what we're talking about. But here we go. This is what I typically go for like a huge lead sound. So you notice my sustain, I mean, it would still keep going forever at that point. That's because when I put something like that, it compresses the sound. It allows you to have more sustain, allows you to really push your amp, allows you to really push your guitar to a new level. So those are the things that I try to remember. When I'm doing my distortions and overdrives, I think, hey, I want less because I want to be able to stick out in the mix. Every time I add an overdrive, I'm adding some overtones to my sound. And this is why stacking is really important. When we stack our overdrives, we can create different characters for each pedal, for our amp. Each amp will take pedals differently. It's really nice, which creates a lot of variety. And then the last thing is, if you want to do something that's really, really heavy gain, you're going to have to compensate by adding a little bit more tone and also probably a little bit more volume. Hey, thanks so much for watching to the very end of the video. If there was something in this video that we didn't cover that you would love to know more about, let us know down in the comments. And be sure to subscribe to us, like this video, so you can see more content that is like this.